Would you guys like to start with the state from foundations, from the start up to pre-display manager?
So,
Well, we have an architecture page for this now.
yes, we do.
Good.
Yes.
How did we manage
It
it?
is called Boot Graphics Architecture.
I looked at what you wrote and I transcribed it.
Oh, cool. Did I write something?
I'm just
You
putting
wrote
it
the
out.
implementation of the
Oh, I see.
Upstart jobs that do the thing. So, I would draw a distinction here. There are actually two aspects of what we're interested in talking about. One is flicker-free boot, which is we want to show something pretty at all times on boot. And the other is actually having a blank console, because there are certain times when you're going to be mode switching, for instance, on suspend resume. We always do a mode switch, I think, right now. If LightDM ever exits due to crash or when it shuts down, because we have no way to do a handoff from LightDM to Plymouth, we always have an exit to console at shutdown. And we also have some cases in the at install as well when Ubiquiti is shutting down and also cannot hand off to Plymouth. So there are some cases where the console, the text console, is always going to be exposed in our life cycle of the session, and we should be making sure that they don't get garbage information on the screen when they get it. So there's the flicker-free question, which I think we're actually doing pretty well on for flicker-free boot at the moment, and there's also the when we have to flicker, do we see a bunch of garbage?
Right.
And we should address both of those for this cycle. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be able to get it spot on perfect.
With the exception of proprietary drivers.
The proprietary drivers have fewer flickers than the Intel drivers currently.
Yes, that's true.
But we can't make it flicker free.
We cannot make it flicker free.
I just answered our interest. Obviously, I want all full text, regular old school VGA is the ultimate goal.
Server uses Plymouth with the details plugin.
Right.
This is not going to change.
Right. So right. Well,
The server people should not be scared by this.
Okay. But then the don't show garbage path is don't clear the garbage. I mean, make sure that it's
Right. So the actual clearing of the garbage is something. The only way we can do that reasonably is after, for instance, LightDM has started successfully on the desktop, because up until the point that LightDM actually starts, we can't clear it because it's important debugging information about the boot, which we need to keep it there until the final handoff. And so we would tie that into the LightDM job somewhere where, as a start on started LightDM, wait 5 seconds, blanket, and then clear the console kind of thing. But not, yes, we would take precautions. Now, one thing you said there is we just want plain VGA. Do you mean that literally, or do you mean we just want a console? Because
you want text to not get lost on boot.
Yes.
And like on my system, I know that on one of my desktop systems, like it boots and the server install and does a text or a mode change, right? And then enough is gone before it gets to the login prompt that I can't see anything. And there's enough delay and everything's good, basically. I have no history.
right.
So I don't.
So you are actually having problems today because we're using frame buffer console? Because the mode switch is when frame buffer console starts. And okay.
Yes.
All right. Thoughts on how to fix that? Actually, so frame buffer.
The canonical fix to that right now is to tell Grub not to do that.
Grub does not start the frame buffer console.
Grub puts you into a Vezin mode and hands off the console in that state.
Yes. However, we start the frame buffer console unconditionally.
True.
And is that the point where we're actually losing things?
I mean, I have to
Okay.
I'd have to look, but I've been, and then the other things, it's not been clear to me or straightforward how you can tell Grub, hey, don't do that sort of stuff, and especially without then getting prompted on upgraded Grub.
So when you change exception default Grub, that is a conf file change, and I will not apologize for the conf file prompts that result from that. But I will apologize for the situation that means that when you do this in automatic packages and such, that you have to resolve it. But when a user changes a conf file manually, they may get a conf file prompt and upgrade. I've been trying hard not to change exception default Grub very much to mitigate this in recent releases. However, Maybe what we can do is add some kind of extra file that isn't a conf file, which is also there. Or something.
I'm going to argue that etc default grub currently does not meet the standard conf files.
I agree.
Because
it's actually UTF, not conf file, I think.
Okay.
Can I like be that guy who asks the ridiculously naive question about not saying like we actually do this, but what would happen if we turn off virtual terminals in the kernel? Would it continue to try and go back to text mode when nobody's trying to be in graphics mode?
If you turn off VTs,
Yes.
you can't have more than one X server.
Is that really necessary for like?
Guest session. I mean, we
No,
expose
I
UI
don't.
this.
I don't mean is multiple X servers necessary. And what I mean is X really so tied to the idea of working through VTs?
Yes.
Yes,
it
does. Well, the display manager.
Because like there's this like
doesn't
share VT option that it'll just like go crazy on the graphics card without synchronizing with the kernel, right?
There is certainly that option. I've not looked into it particularly hard, so it
so
could
like,
do as you
in the context
described.
of the hybrid graphics thing, like that's what I had to do in order to get my NVIDIA card working because the VTs were on the Intel. So I could just say like, talk to the hardware, please.
We're not going to turn off VTs for
Okay,
precise
right,
or in any
okay,
foreseeable Ubuntu version
right.
anyway.
So that's why I'm saying I know we're not doing this, but if we
so-
could imagine that it's possible that we're not seeing like going back to text console, then the question is like, why can't we just make it so VTs only come up when you explicitly like?
I don't believe that turning off support for multiple VTs in the kernel means you don't actually have a VT. It just means you don't have more than one. So it just means that
Or text mode console, or
I don't believe there's an option to turn off support for the text mode console.
so this is supposed to be a thought exercise, and the question is, I think like if you were to do these crazy things, and I do think there is that option. You can have like only serial console for machines that are completely
right.
harmless.
So you can put the console somewhere where the information on it will never be useful to you.
No, I'm like specifically saying that driver just doesn't exist anymore.
What are you trying to achieve then?
Okay, what I'm trying to get towards is if
we
we
were
can
saying
imagine.
we wanted to see the information in the case where it went wrong.
Yes.
So it's not like we want the information not to be there. We want it not to be visible unless
Is
things
there a
go
way
wrong.
to save it to somewhere off screen and then bring it in when something goes wrong, or is that just
No, because when something's gone wrong, you cannot do the thing to bring it on screen. This is the correct path is flicker-free boot. You're seeing Grub, you're seeing Plymouth, you're seeing Light DM, and there's never anything written to this console at all unless you've used an option saying you want verbose, and anything that is written is a bug.
right?
Unless you've booted with something like details but the thing is, there are lots of other things that may write to the console later as well.
Yeah.
So we have to worry about cleaning the screen in various cases there.
But in
I
this
guess
case,
what I
we
was
should-
trying to get at is why do we ever enter text mode except when the user is saying like Alt Control F key?
Because X has failed to start, we want to show you whatever went wrong.
So it is about the okay.
We enter text mode if we cannot do flicker free because we don't have a KMS driver for X. We enter text mode between X shutting down and Plymouth starting on shutdown. And we enter text mode on suspend and resume because we cannot reliably suspend and resume when it's in graphics mode
Right.
on all devices. And we may need to revisit that and see if we can make it more pleasant for certain users. But those are the points where we are going to enter text mode always on a desktop system.
So the suspend and resume case definitely makes sense, and the error case definitely makes sense. But so the killing the X server off as part of a normal log out or as part of shutting the system down, is it just that we can't tell the difference between this and the other case from the layers that are responsible?
You
for
kill
this?
the X server because on logout you want to make sure that the user hasn't left a Trojan.
Oh yes,
or-
absolutely. No, yes, I agree. This is the right thing to do. But what I'm saying is the reason that we have to flicker in this case is because the kernel can't tell the difference, or whatever is responsible is unable to tell the difference between a normal logout and a failure case.
No, we flicker in that case because when the X server exits, which is what we've asked it to do, it puts the console back in the mode it was in before, which
Right.
is
So why don't
text.
we stop that?
Yeah, is there-
Because
But it only matters because
it's not safe. It can get wedged.
and the only reason
Like
we
if
see
it fails
anything
to
poo
restart
is
or
because we don't clear it ever.
Sorry?
And the only reason it's really a problem is because there's something on there that
Right.
shouldn't be.
Right. I mean,
Because it would just go black and then,
Well, the
Well, maybe you
safety,
should
is,
apply
the
it
safety,
like the
the
original
safety
plan.
is largely non-KMS, isn't it? Safety problem.
The
I mean,
safety
the
is
point
if
of
you just-
KMS is so that because
Oh.
the kernel knows how to reprogram the console back to a safe state.
It knows how to program the video hardware back to a same state,
Sorry.
but there's a different matter that I'm more concerned about. It's in graphics mode, and you no longer have the tools to get into text mode.
Right.
In the case of a subsequent X server failure on the next restart.
So one case where this does happen, when you log out, I kill the X server and start a new one. I know the X hasn't failed in that case, so
Well, you know that it's not likely to fail in that case.
You know, the previous one, so LightDM could take responsibility for resetting the console, I think.
Like maybe there was an upgrade since you last logged out, and now your system's not going to work.
yeah, but then it knows if the new one doesn't start. I guess the only case
So
is
it's
when-
known that the previous one has exited cleanly.
Yeah,
So maybe something like DM should say, "Hey, I failed to bring up the X server. Can we go to text
exactly.
mode
It
now?"
knows lots of failure cases that it doesn't know who to tell them to, so it just does a general exit one if it can't do anything. Otherwise, it just
Yeah, this is something more like what I was trying to get at.
Mhm.
That
yeah.
LightDM as the manager, the supervisor of the X server could, provided the X server was modified to have an option to not reset the console on exit, LightDM could take responsibility for supervising it.
that seems like a much better
It's-
experience.
It doesn't cover all the cases. We still need to make sure there's no X no
No
text on the console.
Right. But we should be doing that by clearing it
Let's suspend
immediately
resume.
before
Because we
any
can't
case where it might
suspend
be
the graphics.
Yes.
right.
Can't rely on it.
because
Yeah, but can't I disable the frame buffer?
don't thereafter.
After
There is
it's
one
fixed?
flicker it goes
Say
to
don't touch the
during
frame
boot
buffer.
still, that isn't
that you
Intel
have to
related,
switch the phone
which is
button.
when we hand off from Plymouth to LightDM. LightDM
That is
still
Intel
flashes
related.
one.
That is Intel related.
How is that Intel?
Because the X server is not happy with the mode that the kernel driver has set.
That doesn't sound very sensible of
Because
it.
the X server would like to tile kindly.
Yes.
Why would it need to go white to change tiling?
Well, it doesn't have to go. Oh,
It has
the
to.
white,
It has to
doesn't have
turn
go
off
white.
the.
But-
It doesn't have to go white, but it does have to turn off the.
CRTC
But we've just mode set
re-
from a non-tiled into a tiled mode.
Mhm.
Because we
When-
just DRM
Yeah, this
went
is
to DRM
between
mode.
like DM and the real desktop.
This is a
Oh,
slight-
the grey.
Really?
I'm not talking about the black that you get between Plymouth, just before Plymouth. I'm talking about as LightDM starts, it goes white first.
I can show you this on my hardware.
I know, but nobody seems to care, so we should write it
It's
down.
fixed, isn't it?
No,
It's not fixed
okay.
on my hardware.
you need compositing.
No,
Because
we had loads of shouting
the X
about
window turns
black
up.
flickers, and then this one
and you
didn't.
don't-
Yeah. And what we did is we changed it to a purple flicker, so you don't notice it anymore.
Ah.
It's 'cause it's-
I still notice
it's-
it.
I still see it.
Yeah.
I can see it.
I'm nearly certain I
Are you
still
talking
see
about the
it in
black flash
precise.
or the white?
The white flash, or it is a funny grey colour.
Greyish flash.
So the problem is there that, remember this, okay, there's an upgrade issue. If you upgraded from Natty, you get a different reader, and this was never solved.
This is
No,
with
this is with the
Unity.
right reader, having
Oh, you have
switched
the
it
right
manually.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if
This
the
is
machine's really slow, you can see it because it goes.
Mine doesn't do that, but it does flicker a grey.
I can show you in a minute. At the end, I'll show you. But
Yeah,
still,
I know the one, but we might be able to work around it in this cycle.
Is there an action item there, or is it just,
Yep.
the action item is somebody needs to report the bug that they're seeing? and-
It's a known bug, but yeah, fix flash on Unity restart.
Flicker between, the flicker between Grub and Plymouth.
yes.
We're working on that, but,
So what's happened there?
this is the kernel driver is not happy with the mode that
That Grub is.
Grub is set up.
Grub is.
Is that a Grub bug?
No,
What it is, actually is, having talked to upstream about it, the actual problem is that we don't know well enough how to unpick the mess that Grub has made from its point of view, so we have to take it apart completely. We
Well,
can't
no.
Grub is used to be
trivially hand it off.
I spent
Well,
Friday
Grub is-
afternoon with Keith hacking on this.
All right.
He's fixing it.
Oh, he's going to fix it.
He's got all the information now that he needs. However,
Good.
there's some limitations on this. And this is part of why I say etc default grub should not be a comp file, is because sometimes the BIOS does not know the native panel mode and does not
Yes.
expose it in VBE.
Yeah.
So if users actually want flicker free, they will have to manually set a resolution.
Yeah.
There is,
Adam is working on the config file handling for its default class.
Yes.
How do they manually set the resolution if the BIOS doesn't
No,
know?
sometimes it exposes it in VBE, but it doesn't say it's a default mode.
Ah, okay, right.
So we
No,
select
that
the wrong
makes
one.
Actually, no, as far as I can tell, VB doesn't have a notion of a default mode, and what the grub code actually does is,
Well, both things happen.
right, but
Um,
you can still set the mode even if VB doesn't list it as an option based on
No,
just,
you can't. As far as I know.
Yeah, I thought you needed to select from the
It
VBE
needs,
mode.
It needs to have an entry in the VBE mode table because it picks the number out of the VBE
Okay.
mode table and passes that to whatever
okay,
the
so
VBE call is.
we can't do it, it's BIOS dependent, and some
Right.
BIOSes are better than others.
But there are definitely some BIOSes that have their panel mode in. I think we saw at least one of them in our workshop a rally or two ago. That have it in their list of VBE modes,
Oh,
but
but it's
don't
not
list it
for
as default.
default.
Yeah, or preferred.
So you're
So
saying
I thought, no, I've looked at the grub code, and I thought what it does is it says, give me the best mode, which is the highest bit depth and smaller than what EDID gives.
Before it tries heuristics like that, it interrogates the flat panel extensions and whichever other edit thing it is. There are two different things in the VB extensions, which that's a tautology, which let you ask for an actual default mode, an actual preferred mode,
Okay.
and it will use that by preference.
Okay. I bounced a bug in your direction about a case where grub is apparently not doing something reasonable with the EDID information. That's good.
Okay,
It's
can I
bounced in the direction
let
of
me-
grub 2. It's not a,
Let me have an action to.
So did you say he's working on something
right.
to
So what we're doing,
move
the
into
issue,
the mode?
the issue is first, the KMS driver was not ever bothering to check what mode the panel was in before deciding it needed to do a mode set. That's fixed. Fixed in DRM Intel Next. Next issue is that there's no fuzzy matching on the mode line, and there needs to be, because for the frame buffer console, we don't really care if it's exactly the same mode line that the kernel driver would pick. We care that it's the right resolution, and the numbers can be a little bit different, and it will still work just fine on an LCD.
The main problem is, and it's unfixable, is that sometimes it'll be planar versus dot. But
Yes.
And in that case, we get a flicker and we can't do anything about it.
Right.
The issue he was telling me he had was that the driver only understood how to tie certain things in certain orders, and a lot of BIOSes will configure things the totally non-obvious way around, using plane A and pipe B together, for example, which is not something the code actually knows how to join up in that order. So it has to take it apart in order to switch it around, which means it has to take it apart. It couldn't just pick up the mode and hold the mode that's there because it's in a non-configurable form from its point of view, because it's never had to comply.
That's possible as well. We didn't see that issue when we were going through it.
And it may be that we may be getting 20% closer,
well.
which is still better than nothing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's obviously still going to be a range of hardware we simply cannot do flicker-free from bootloader to X, just because it's because the kernel driver requires changes, because the BIOS isn't smart enough to know the native resolution of the panel, all these kinds of things. But we're still going to be doing mode setting.
There's a class of ThinkPass where if you actually set the default mode, no, that was the one where you had to step the color depth down.
Yeah, that was mine.
Yeah, those
If yours
Radeons.
and a bunch of others.
Yeah.
Radeon, isn't that?
No, Intel. If you set a
Really?
32-bit, if you set the 32-bit mode, it went all scrambled and then scrambled it forever.
It's a bug in the ThinkPass VB BIOS.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay. Right, so because we know we're not going to be able to do flicker-free boot on all hardware, we have to make sure it's text-free by making sure that things underneath the flickers are clear.
Yes.
And we haven't really done any analysis so far on what kinds of things are going to spit text out, but
I care more about clearing it before we might display the console than ensuring that we never. The task of ensuring that we never spit stuff out it reminds me of whoever it was who had to push the rock up to the top of the hill in Hades.
Okay.
And I would rather we just.
But
Frankly, I'd rather
in the cases where we're having boot failures, it is very valuable information, and I do think we want to, if we're going to say that for final, we switch it on to just always clear before LightVM starts, before the handoff, that in that case, that's something we should turn on in the last week of the release, and that we should leave it on for debugging prior to that.
Probably, yes.
Okay.
Okay,
do we
so
get
in that
the
case, we do want to at least reduce the amount of output we're getting. But some of it is, I think, deliberate. You get, so looking at my screen on shutdown, aside from the fact that it is stair-stepped output, which is a horrible term I always bug someone that somebody extremely unfortunate is going to have to track down, which may be me. A lot of the messages there are init script output that are of the sort that if we turn off, the server people are going to hate us.
No, but in the quiet case, that should all be redirected. Is the thing.
Well, it's redirected to the console that we're looking at. We need to. Well, it's redirected to the. It's supposed to be intercepted by Plymouth.
Yes.
And there's something going on that Plymouth isn't.
Or Plymouth isn't
yes,
But
running
Plymouth
it.
has shut down.
What
So
could-
it's
sorry.
the problem I think is that Plymouth has shut down, or shut down when like the M starts,
Yeah.
and now our redirected init script output is just going to TY7 or something and is not being intercepted by anything.
Could we not put the console on a different TTY? Why does it need to be on the TTY under X in the first
I
place?
think it needs to be on the TTY that Plymouth is looking at.
I thought Plymouth just did the give me the console output IOPTL.
Can it fetch output from a console that it's not displaying on?
The console is a different place to the place it's connected to, isn't it?
There's dev console versus dev VT0.
Right.
TTY0.
We'd have to look what it does, but it does some Wibble octal that just says make this file descriptor into the console, doesn't it?
I don't know that we're going to be able to analyse it here, but there's definitely something wrong with how Plymouth is.
But why do we care if Plymouth gets the console output?
Because
Because
Plymouth
it-
is responsible for logging the console output.
But all it does is logs the 7 seconds while it's running.
No. That's the. It logs everything up to the point. Yes, it logs everything up to the point where it exits. But if you turn off quiet, say, and then want to see what your boot is, or if you're on a server where it's running from the start, or if crypt setup is there, or there are quite a few situations where Plymouth gets to monitor the entire boot. In fact, doesn't Plymouth run from the start anyway? At least for purposes.
Sorry?
Is the Plymouth daemon always in the inbound class?
No, it's not always in the internet. Should we put it there?
For logging purposes, arguably.
It starts up very early anyway.
But we don't start it until after we've mode switched, do we?
No, we don't start the Plymouth Splash until after we mode switch, but the Plymouth daemon is available and could be gathering and logging information. And I think we start that on startup.
No, Plymouth daemon starts in the init.
It's
Not
variable.
It doesn't always.
It depends on a few factors. Most notably, if crypt setup is installed, then you'll always get Plymouth in the init manifest. But I mean, I think that the conditionalization there is confusing, and
It is.
it was a compromise to achieve boot speed, but we may be able to do better.
I really
Don't we propose to actually drop the init manifest for the common case of having ext system?
I wasn't in that. I wasn't in that session, but I think it's a bad idea. So,
so
this may not be useful.
the solution is we will detect whether or not we need the init manifest to boot to the disk that's the root file system, and if so, we don't configure the main grub line to use it. But the recovery line uses it because the init manifest is the only thing that puts us in recovery mode anyway.
Because what we needed was more variables in the boot process. Wonderful.
And then we can just pull Plymouth in the init
It
condition.
would replace the variable of having Plymouth in the init manifest or not by the variable of having it in the manifest in the first place.
Which is a much bigger variable.
Yeah, but then again, for boot speed or something, or for ease of boot, it's actually easier to not have init manifest.
Well, we improve boot speed in the common case significantly.
And also, it looks a bit better because Plymouth will actually kick in a little earlier.
No. Well, I mean, Plymouth will kick in a little bit earlier in recovery mode.
No, in normal mode.
It will kick in later because you no longer have an init manifest. The only time Plymouth kicks in early is when you do have an init manifest with Plymouth in it.
Plymouth
but
will-
we usually don't. So
Plymouth
usually
will
you put it, like you have 10 seconds of text and 2 seconds of Plymouth.
No, the effect of this is that, well, yeah, okay. If what I would like to see is Plymouth running right from the start in Groundfest.
Yeah, I agree.
In all cases. What we have is that it often starts after you read ahead, and in the case where we don't have an Groundfest, then we have no choice, because if we start Plymouth D before you read ahead, we'll compromise boot speed very significantly because of thrashing. So the only way that we can start Plymouth before you read ahead and have some indication of what's happening to the user is if we put Plymouth in the environment.
I disagree with that. The cost of starting Plymouth before you read ahead, I think, is actually less than the cost of loading the RMFS from the BIOS.
You think?
So I think we would actually come out ahead
How
and have Plymouth starting earlier.
there's a lot of talk about getting rid of NIT RAMFS. How are machines going to find their root file systems?
Tim's going to write us a patch.
No, that's for UUIDs. That doesn't mean you've got any drivers to actually talk to your disk anymore.
Oh,
90% of the drivers are not built in. You're going to build them all in and make the kernel 500 times the size. So it takes
Which means
10
you have
extra
to
seconds to load.
Which means you have to load it to the BIOS. And what do you get?
Well, and you guarantee it takes up memory instead of not.
But, okay, 90% of drivers? My understanding
You're not gonna have a-
my understanding was 5 cycles ago that the common case disk drivers were already built into the kernel because they were used so commonly. It was simpler and cheaper.
The most common 3 are, yes.
Which covers actually what percentage of
Difficult to
devices?
say.
Sorry?
Because we're not allowed to have a hardware database, it's very difficult to say.
Well, I haven't been in the Groundfest session, but I just felt that probably proposing the Groundfest for the UUID instead.
Right, so
We
definitely need more
number of
code.
systems enough to get the machine up and running. Certainly it is on everything that I had used to have so far.
But why would we not just make a minimal NIT RAMFS
So
using
why-
the
why
options
do
that
you
already
need to
exist? If you're going to sacrifice the first element to begin with.
But the only reason why we didn't have it in the Groundfest in the first place is that we need to compute that through the UID from the root file system. But if the
No,
kernel
that's
can
not
do
the
that,
reason.
No,
So that we can mount
it is.
So that we have some modules that allow us to find
No,
our
we
best.
don't need that.
Yeah,
You don't
this
need
is
to be
an
able to-
entirely different conversation, and
Yeah, it is.
if you have these strong opinions, I wish you would come to that session.
You can't
But-
come to every session,
I know.
and you can't come to sessions you don't get told about.
We should
Until
have,
after the
if there's more discussion needed, we should have that
So we'll do it after, yeah,
Um,
it's fine. I'll shut up.
don't shut up, just talk about things that are scheduled. So, as far as the text reboot question, the information needs to be available for debugging purposes in case we don't manage to finish the boot. Once LightDM starts, it could handle clearing it.
Didn't it need to be cleared before we started LightDM?
No,
I
it needs
think
to be
you
cleared
can.
before X starts.
No,
It's
you
different.
can. I'm not convinced it even needs to be cleared before X starts. I think you can clear the console while X is running on it.
You can clear it while X is running, but you may have a flicker between Plymouth and X.
Yeah. So I just mean that there's no constraint that says that you can't operate on the text part of the console in certain ways, even when the console is in KD graphics mode.
Right, I believe you can do text
Yes.
operations, which is how the
Well,
text ends
which
up
is-
on.
Yes, exactly.
Right,
Why do we have to fit between Plymouth and X? Doesn't
I'm sorry.
Because we're a proprietary driver,
Oh.
and there's no way we can set the right mode first.
Yes.
do we care much about it?
Apparently we do.
All NVIDIA hardware uses it if you want to use Unity 3D.
We care to the extent of making sure that it doesn't
You store
display
ensure
text.
that-
So that's compromise.
We don't care about the fact that we don't care enough about the fact that it flickers.
Yeah, and
But we'd like it to
again,
be
we've also
Mac.
said there's a common case for a free driver, which is the Intel driver. You're going to get a flicker there anyway,
Because it is.
But that flicker
because it changes
Yeah.
from planar to tiling mode on the frame.
Does that mean
But that
X
flicker
gets-
is not to text. That is not.
That's
That does
a
not
black-
show the text.
Indeed, that is
It turns off the
turning off the
backlight.
display.
It turns off the backlight, messes with it, and turns it back on. So it's different, and that isn't the console.
All right.
It's just
And
off.
does that mean X starts with the previous image from Plymouth, or it starts with
Yeah.
it does?
Yeah, no, it's not there. It's earlier. It's before Plymouth.
Sorry?
You don't start. The flicker for Intel is before Plymouth.
There are 2 flickers.
Not for me.
You could, if X does not like the mode
Oh,
that
I see.
the kernel
Flickers,
gives,
yeah.
it does a mode set again.
Right, but if it's a mode set in graphics mode, it shouldn't show the console.
Okay.
Because we're not going back, we're not releasing the VT and coming back, we
True.
just reprogram it.
True. Okay.
So where's the right place? Should we do this in LightDM or do we do it in X?
Light DM
X.
should do it because X should not. We shouldn't be changing X to make it right to its terminals.
Yeah.
So I just clear the console.
Clear the console before the X server starts. Do we want to clear the console before the X server exits?
That's the
So-
common,
Yes.
that's the common
Yes.
case we
Because I have
see.
to restart it. when you
And
log out.
something should clear the console
We should clear the
before
console.
suspend.
We should clear the console immediately before either. Yeah, before access. Yes. Yeah.
Before
And
we-
before suspend.
Is there a cursor involved in that?
Mhm.
Is there a cursor on the console?
And can you turn it off?
Yeah.
You can certainly turn off the cursor.
I don't recall seeing the cursor.
I've seen cursors on boot. I think it's earlier though.
There's a, yes,
so
that's-
we
something
patched the. Did that patch land? There was a change to the kernel, I think, to disable the cursor by default, which Matthew Garrett posted.
I wouldn't know if we'd see that because I think all the machines I've got hand off correctly from
It
Grub.
doesn't matter because we use VT handoff.
'Cause you
which-
can't see it,
Right,
right.
yeah.
The only cursor I see is actually before Grub starts.
Before
Which is
it
the
goes purple.
BIOS,
Yes.
so we've got no choice there.
Yes.
So what does it mean to clear the console? Because if you like,
Textually
if,
clear.
Clear right angle bracket FT2Y7.
right,
As
so
as in clear.
but if I like switch to Virtual Console 3 and go back to X, then when I suspend, I see Virtual Console 3, not Virtual Console 7.
Really?
I think so.
Is
I
this
thought we went
because
to
X
one- don't we go to
remembers?
zero? I
Is
thought
this
we did.
because X remembers the properties of whatever it last switched away from?
I think it's something like that. Not that I think this is
believe it
particularly
does.
important,
I
because
thought
it'll
it was
only hit
PM
people
utils
that
that
have
switch VTs.
specifically switched VTs, which
Such as people who use a switch.
I don't know about that case.
I thought PM utils did the switch to zero.
Yeah, I thought so.
I thought it was zero that it went to.
0?
Right,
Oh,
because
one.
X doesn't handle suspend resume at all.
Yeah, maybe it's when
No.
maybe it's not on suspend resume, but when I shut the X server down,
So-
I see that console
so
or something
PM
like that.
PM utils has.
I know there's sometimes when I see the last place I logged in on the console.
So I'm just.
Yeah, no,
looking
that-
up.
that- That's just my
KMS,
experience.
if you're using KMS, we don't change VTs on suspend. Or PM utils doesn't change VTs. If you are using KMS, then we do change VTs to 63 apparently.
But there's text there.
I have no idea why there's text from console 63.
Well, it can't be.
Changing VTs is different. Do we actually set it into text box in the KMS case?
I
Or does the driver
so,
set it
no,
into text
no.
box?
It's just a security.
I'm not sure.
Or can I do it after X?
Why do you need to do that?
Because you get these cases where you see
Actually, I don't have text on mine.
previous information.
Oh, but that's previous information that is not in X's.
We
present.
save and restore the VBE state, but that's to
not
get it
X's
back
problem.
to X. And VBE mode. We set the VBE mode to mode 3. I think.
I don't know what that means. Also, is it possible the kernel is doing this in the driver?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure about it right now, Bob.
Okay.
So,
So I think we need some more investigation there on what actually happens on suspend.
Well, I just tested it and it happened.
You got text.
Yes, that's how it runs, sure.
Oh, you got a VT switch to the to
Yes,
something other than the
So
X terminal.
Yeah.
VT?
VT6. I think it was, I was scrolling through them, so I'm not sure which.
So if you switch VT5 back to 7 suspend, you get VT5.
I would imagine, yeah. I went through all of them. I went through 1, 2, 3, 4, and I don't remember what the last one I saw done, but I did see it. During suspend and resume.
Okay, so
Who has
there's a bug we need to fix there on. We're gonna have to track that down.
So what's the desired state? We always leave it on. Well, do we want? I think the desired state is what I just described with PM utilities behavior. which is if we have KNS, leave the VT alone. Otherwise, switch VT63 to force everything back to text mode, because otherwise we can't suspend resume safely. Does that sound?
Yeah, that should be appropriate. You should be able to suspend from.
But then do we also
Total
make sure
mode
we
setting.
clear VT63?
I think that, so PM utils will deallocate VT63 after it resumes. So unless somebody has actually allocated it, then I don't think it should be mentioned.
Okay. Well, and we do sometimes you do get actual text output from the kernel during suspend resume still, don't you?
That should be handled by deallocating it afterwards. Well,
It appears you don't want it to appear to the user during suspend resume.
I think I've seen at least one line during.
Which seems
And I
Problem
always
is you
see
want that
something during hibernate.
yes.
Which is the same thing, but it's there longer, so you notice
Yeah.
it. The problem with that information is the kind of information that's only there, I mean, because the kernel by default is not outputting anything below whatever's just below kernel emergency. It's anything there that's coming out is marked to be very important.
Yeah.
And so it would come under our belief of wanting to see it. Unfortunately, if we stop it, we won't see it ever. And if it's the last thing it says before a suspend resume failure, it's a bit of a problem.
Right. So
I just suppose you can
it
suspend
might be
resume with log
the
level.
only way you can debug a suspend resume failure.
But I guess you can set log level higher.
yeah.
So we could consider setting log level even lower. Kernel log level even lower. As in what
Yeah.
goes to the physical console log level even lower. Because right now it's at 2, I think.
Okay.
Or we could have PM utils save the log level.
Right, that's
set
what I'm,
it
sorry,
to
that's what I'm saying.
emergency and then
Right.
suspend.
Now, I'm not sure
we
if
should
you
have
can...
an override for debugging, but I think changing the default so that we don't get anything at all on that screen during suspend resume is probably the right way.
Right, I think that's
So-
right.
But do you agree that doing this in PM utils rather than changing the kernel's general default
Yes.
style?
So the only question is whether there's any way for you to do that. You may not be able to... It may be an equals, and therefore you may not be able to turn it off completely. So we'd have to check.
Okay.
But we might just fix the ones that show up. If we can set it to emergency.
About an action item.
Okay.
All right. 5 minutes left. What are we missing as far as action items? Everything is not covered.
We don't have an action item for going and hunting, destroying things that write text.
But I thought we decided we couldn't do that because server needs them, or
Well,
verbose
we-
mode needs them.
So we have an action for clearing the console, but we seem to have a rough consensus that that text shouldn't be written to a console.
But we also said that it's inevitable at some point. Well, so
Well, the problem is we've let go of the console. We've deemed it worth recording for all of boot, but after boot we don't deem it worth recording, so we don't record it anymore.
Sure.
Oh.
Because Plymouth's job is to record it, but we stopped Plymouth, so it's not doing it anymore. That's why it's going to the console.
Well, no. There are some. I think there are some bugs there.
Incidentally, why do we actually stop Plymouth entirely rather than...
In
Put
fact,
it-
that's one of the
de-splash
things we
it.
do. No. So, if we're booting to a desktop, we don't actually have to quit Plymouth.
That's what I'm saying, D-splash
We
Plymouth
have to
only.
turn it splash
Right.
out, but
It could be kept running, but I don't know how long we would want to keep that running. We don't necessarily want to keep it running indefinitely.
it's not going to do anything.
Hmm?
If it doesn't do anything, then
Well, the question is...
Does it ever write its logs out until you exit it?
yes. Well, there's a job that tells it to save its log to none. I don't remember whether it continues to write after that. This is probably just a change for Plymouth anyway. It's yeah.
But I do think we need to
That's
investigate to
what
make sure that Plymouth is capturing the log output that it's meant to,
Yeah.
and review to make sure that's actually working right.
Yeah.
Because I have my doubts that it does.
Okay, I'm sure I've seen it do it, so maybe it's already.
I'm sorry, I'm sure that it is logging stuff. I'm not sure that it is doing what we want it to as far as keeping that stuff that it's logging from also appearing on the console.
Oh, I see, yes. My suspicion is that it's only stuff that's written after Plymouth stops, that is written based on what I've managed to spot by observing shutdown.
Okay. The way to test that, to be sure, is to deliberately boot without X, so that what we do at Plymouth quit, so we can see what's there at that point, or to, yeah, that's probably the easiest way.
And when you do that, you get, the first thing you get on the console is TY1 login.
Switch DBTs back to 7.
Oh, switch to 7. I don't know.
So,
So we might like to clear the console and fix up the Beauty Greeter bug.
do we think we can tackle the question of having LightDM and X cooperate to not set the console back into, to have X not set the console back into text mode?
Essentially to hand it back to them. The same way it's handed in the opposite direction.
Because even if the screen is clear, like on my screen at home, every time there's a mode set, I get this thing that comes up that says input HDMI.
I mean, it makes,
Not,
in an ideal world, we do exactly what we do in the opposite direction and hand the screen back
exactly.
in a nice, cute purple back to like
whatever
DM to
is
draw
like
its box on and
And
everything.
that's like ideal. And then if you manage that, I mean, you can even stop talking about how much stuff is on the console because you can see it.
Well, most of the time at least.
Well, one of my concerns is
Not in
any,
the KMS case, we can stop it.
Right.
I do have a concern that anything that's actually showing up on the console is stuff that's not being sent to where it's supposed to for logging.
Sure.